or the echinothrips. There's some work that's been done looking at biologicals for echinothrips, and they found that several of the mite species will feed on it, but it's not enough to control it. And there's a big difference between saying a beneficial will feed on it and actually having the beneficial control it. And that's something that's important to understand when looking at what works in beneficials and what doesn't. Another thing you really have to do is to be willing to think about what you're going to spray. It's become much more complicated, even from 10 years ago, because we do have so much more information available about insecticide compatibility with the biocontrol agents. You really have to understand these relationships, and it can be confusing at times, and sometimes there's not information available, which can be a little frustrating there. When you do go to spray, even though some of these products may be listed as completely safe, keep in mind that just blasting plants with water not only can take off pests, but it also can knock off your beneficials. So even though you may be spraying a compound that's safe, chemically, with your beneficials, you still could be impacting their population. Also, inerts and pesticides can have impacts. Some of the surfactants that come in insecticide products actually have good insecticidal properties in themselves. So that can impact your beneficials. So even if you're spraying, again, an active ingredient that can be soft on your beneficials, those inerts can have an impact. Also, another big one that we're looking at more these days is spray drift. And you may have a part of your production facility where you're releasing your beneficials, but on the other side, you may need to do a pesticide spray. Pesticides drift farther than you think, and with the ability now to do leaf tissue analysis, where you can pick off a leaf of a plant, send it to a lab in North Carolina, and for about $350, they can give you a 4-page report that will tell you every insecticide, fungicide, PGR, down to the parts per billion that's on that foliage. And by having access to that testing, people are really starting to find out how far these pesticides drift. In outside settings, in agricultural areas, they found that pesticides will drift for several miles. So you really need to think about what you're spraying, especially if you're in a greenhouse, on one side of it, because that product, even though you're spraying it on crops that may not be going on plants that beneficials are being released on, there's a chance that product may drift over to where your beneficials are being released. So you do have to think about those things. The other thing with pesticides is understand that the information is constantly changing. It's, you know, recommendations I made 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago are changing. So it's important. You've got to keep up with the current information that's happening. And it can seem a little frustrating, actually, very much to me, because for years you make a recommendation and you think you're giving good advice, but then new research comes out and it shows that, oh, whoops, you know, we know more now. One of those recent things that's happened to me is with azadirachtin, which is something that has always been touted as very compatible with the beneficials, but now we have research showing that azadirachtin can impact some of the predatory mites' egg-laying ability. So it's not that you spray the azadirachtin and it kills your beneficial mites, but if it reduces their egg-laying capability, it's going to impact that next generation. So it's just something that when we put programs together, we have to think about those nuances. The other big thing that's come out lately is with PGRs. Those are the plant growth regulators. They've actually found in certain systems with aphids and certain aphid parasites that drenching PGRs can actually impact the populations of the
and everything that I can, because that's my job, not his job. Yeah. So he sends me these. This is Biocontrol, and it's till 3:45. Better be careful.
All right. Okay, sorry. It's hard to talk over people. But example with the PGRs, again, they found that drenching a PGR does have a feed-through effect on these parasites. And it actually, in certain species with certain PGRs, it can actually skew your parasite population male. And in some situations, you may not get any emergence from that. It's really great information. Steve Frank at the University of North Carolina is doing that work, and it's readily available online. Or if someone's interested in the research papers, you can contact him or me, and we can get you that information. But again, it's important to keep on top of that information, and that's why things like this webinar today are so important, because you get the newest and latest information that's coming out. Now, most of you will be familiar with these links here, and these are where you can go to learn about compatibility with biocontrol agents. These companies are doing a lot of testing on their own products to see how the pesticides do impact their beneficials. Now, with BASF purchase of Becker Underwood, they've moved things around on their website. So old bookmarks you may have had in the past have changed. This is the newest link so that you can get to the information on compatibility of nematodes and biocontrol agents. Below that is BioBest. What I really like too with BioBest is they do have a mobile app available, so you can download the information to your phone. And also, when it's downloaded as an app like that, it will update and keep updated with the most current information. And then also Copert has very good information if you go into their websites. When you go in, you want to look for side effect charts. That's typically what they're listed under. Now, when you do go in to the BioBest website, you can go in and you will see a page like this. And I really like that they've kind of expanded on the right over here, their legend here. So before, it used to just be a 1, 2, 3, 4 system, which it's very good, but still there was room for wiggle, because even at a 1 and non-toxic, that only means you're going to get less than 25% mortality. A green number 1 does not mean, oh, absolutely safe, hunky-dory, there's no problems. It just means that you're going to kill less than 25% beneficials. Now they've added in like a 1 to 2, where products that could actually fall in between, and same thing between 2 to 3. They've kind of expanded the range now, so you can get a little more information in there. And all you have to do is you go in on the left, and you can either put in by the active ingredient, or you can put in the commercial product name, and then you can put in the beneficial here. And then you click it, put the information, and then this information will appear down below. You can see here, looking at some of the mites and parasites, they can be very different on the different life stages, because with Aphidius, it may be very soft on the larva, but can be very toxic to the adult. So when someone just says, hey, my product is safe, well, what do you mean safe? What life stages is it safe with? What kind of mortality are you seeing? It's important to understand the specifics of that, because that can help you with your timing on your applications there. Something else that I really like that they've added in is they've added a lot more specifics on there on the way you're applying it. Are you spraying it? Are you irrigating it? Are you dipping it? Are you dusting it? Are you fumigating it? Because we can see difference on the impacts of beneficials between drenching / irrigating and foliar applications, because there's a difference between contact with a product or possibly a feed through. So that is something that is really important, that I really like that BioBest is also added to their table there. And so it's important to go back and revisit products periodically on these tables, because as you can see, information has changed and will change, and more information is becoming available out there. Also, sometimes you can just Google the active ingredient name and then the beneficial, because the universities are doing research also, and those are typically found in forms of research papers, and you can typically get a lot more information from those research papers, and they are available out there online. Now, when you are looking at these tables, and you're like, well, one table says one thing, another table says another thing from another company, why are they different? Well, with beneficials, mites, and nematodes, they're not all exactly the same. You know, they're different, just like in plants or different cultivars, there could be different strains of things like nematodes, and there can be slightly different genetic makeups in these groups. So that is why sometimes you can get different answers between the different companies. Also, their testing procedures can be different. Are they just spraying it on a leaf, putting the beneficials on there, closing the lid, and are they alive in 24 hours? Are they alive in 48 hours? Or are they monitoring it for a month? Or are they monitoring it for, you know, the second generation, third generation? You know, it can be very different. Again, if they're enclosing it in an airtight container, the results could be very different than if it's sprayed out in a nursery or a greenhouse. So you can get different results. Depending on how the actual testing is done. There is some standardized testing that people do try to follow, but you still can get some variance in there. So, you know, if you're really curious, you can ask how the testing's been done. Another interesting thing I've been seeing a little bit, and this relies a little bit more on the marketing side of things when it comes to the product. When products are being promoted that, hey, we're safe with beneficials, I'm finding that sometimes with the marketing information, they're basically just showing you the results that they want to show you, that they're only showing you the beneficials that their products are compatible with, and then leaving out the ones that their products can be toxic with, because everybody these days are trying to paint their products compatible with beneficials, safe with pollinators. So if you're looking at a product and it has these claims on, oh, we're safe with beneficials in there, you might want to ask again which specific beneficials. Or if you notice you're looking at the list of beneficials, but they leave a lot of the key ones out that are commonly used today, you have to ask, well, why would you test these beneficials and not these other ones? So it's things you have to think about when you are making these selections on products that you are going to be using. And the reason I'm talking so much about, you know, this pesticide selection, which typically is something you may think about later in a biocontrol program, it's because going through those lists of what we have biocontrols for and what if we don't, you know, what if you have a crop that, let's say, has spider mites, but then also has mealybugs? Well, you want to do your predatory mites for your spider mites, but for the mealybugs, we're going to have to come up with some kind of spray program. So before we even get started, we have to make sure we have products that will be compatible in that system. So we kind of have to have some of these products lined up if you do need them in your system. So that's why it's important to think about these things even before you get started. All right, another thing to think about with biocontrol programs is how your plants are spaced. This comes into application methods and about labor and cost of labor of putting out beneficials. A lot of times when people initially talk to me about biocontrols, the first thing they ask is, well, is it going to save me money? Is it less expensive? And now my kind of answer back is, well, obviously you're talking to me because you're struggling to control a particular pest. That's often what happens. And in some situation where we're really struggling to control certain pests chemically, you kind of don't have a choice. So with that said, going to the economics, which I'll talk a bit more about in a little bit, is spacing can make a difference, because if plants are spaced really far out, it can impact your labor costs. In this situation here on the left and the right, you can see that with the pots touching, you can broadcast out your beneficials, especially on the floors on the left, and with those plants touching like that, they'll be able to distribute themselves throughout the crop. Even somewhat on the right, those pots are pretty close together. Those plants, those peppers are going to be touching pretty soon, and the beneficials will be able to move throughout the crop really easy. One thing I do want you to look at is on the left over here is you have all these nice plants down here, but what about these pots hanging up above? This is something you have to be very aware about when starting a biocontrol program. If you're going to grow pots above and you're going to have plants on the floor below, you have to think about what you're going to do with your beneficials. I actually had a greenhouse one time contact me because they wanted to do biocontrols, but they wanted to do biocontrols on the floor, but not the hanging basket. The problem you can see what the problem is right there is if you spray anything up here, it's going to fall down to the plants below. And even if you spray the plants below and want to use biocontrol up top, you might have issues with the pesticides volatilizing back up. And again, you're going to get some spray drift. Even if you did on the baskets, let's say you wanted to do a drench of systemics, you're always going to get some dripping out on the crops below. So it's very important to think about, if you're going to do this multi-layered growing, what's going to be up top and what's below. So you can't just focus on the plants below and not think about the plants up top when you're considering doing a biocontrol program. I've had situations where the plants above have dictated that we can't do biocontrol on the plants below because of their spray needs. So it's really important to look at those things. Here's another situation where spacing can make things a little difficult. These pots are so well spaced that if you did want to put out beneficials, the non-flying ones, I'm talking about things like predatory mites, the labor to apply them to every pot once they have been spaced, the cost is going to be high because you're going to have to get them on every plant. Also, reaching the middle of tables can be a challenge. When they're pot tight where they're clustered a bit more and there's that canopy, they can run between them. And especially on an ebb and flood bench, because if the bench is full of water, if there's any beneficials that have walked down the pot and are moving their way trying to find a new home, if that water comes on, they're going to get washed away. So this is the one of the things that's important, is to look at how you're spacing, when you space, and when to time your applications of your beneficials. But if it's a crop that is well spaced throughout its life and application could be difficult, that may be a limiting factor on using the biocontrol agents. Also, when crops are well spaced, it's a lot easier to get spray coverage. So those are the things you have to look at. Is it easier in this situation to use a spray because you can get the spray coverage because they are spaced out so well? Because generally when plants are rammed together and pot tight, that's when the beneficials do extremely well, because they can get into all the nooks and crannies that spray products often cannot get into. Another thing to look at is quarantine laws. And again, this does not impact everybody. It depends on where you live or where your production facility is in the country, where you are growing. Are you a nursery? Are you a greenhouse? And I bring up nursery because I am getting contacted by more nurseries wanting to incorporate biocontrol agents into outdoor production. So it is something that the trend is moving that direction. So a good example of that is growers in the southeastern portion of the United States, fire ants. They're in the fire ant quarantine zone. And if their plants are going to be shipped out of that fire ant quarantine zone, you do have to treat for fire ants. Most growers opt to pre-incorporate Talstar into their media. And where this can create problems is that eliminates some of the beneficials that we can use in the soil. So we can't use things like hypoaspis, which is now called the Strelolapsis, the predatory mite that lives in the soil and feeds on fungus gnats and thrips pupa and things like that. It also limits the use of rove beetles. So when we're putting together biocontrol programs inside these quarantine zones, we do have to think about what is the law dictating that you do. The same thing applies for people that are up north. When you buy these plants out from inside the quarantine zone, if you're bringing up plants that have Talstar incorporated into the media, when you get them, are you going to be able to continue on a biocontrol program? It is an important question to ask, and this is something that is typically a little bit more of an interior-scape issue, where I see interior-scape companies buying tropical foliage from the south, they bring it up north, install it, and want to get beneficials into the soil established, and we can't because of that Talstar. Also Japanese beetles, because of the Japanese Beetle Harmonization Act, having to ship plants around. There are certain drenching requirements for that. cycad scale, for the nursery guys, again, they're required to do regular drenches of systemic neonics. So that does limit biocontrol options there, and so on. So it's just something to be aware of. If you do have quarantine laws, think about, how is that going to impact your biocontrol program there. Another really important thing with beneficials is you have to scout. Either that, or you're going to spend more money on beneficials. It's you got to pick one or the other. Either you're going to scout and you're going to release the numbers you need in the places you need, and make your program very efficient that way. The other option is not to invest in scouting and just do high rates of mass releases, which is basically what we've always been doing in the past when we just would do a spray schedule, basically on a calendar, because growers used to go out and, because it's this day of the week, I'm going to put my tag mix together and I'm just going to go spray and do a preventative program. And they would just spray on a calendar. You can do the same thing with biocontrol agents. You can just release them, and if there's no there's no pests out there, they will just end up starving to death. But that can get expensive. With growing, with bios, if you commit to scouting and you can find out where you need to release them, also finding out if your beneficials are establishing, because sometimes these beneficials can establish quite well in production facilities, and you may not have to keep putting the numbers out nor as many times of the releases. But really, you've got to commit, and it's best to have someone committed to do the scouting or have an outside scout come in. Having somebody come in from the outside really can provide a fresh pair of eyes, because with you looking at your plants every day, day in, day out, sometimes your eyes get a little glossed over and it's easy to miss things. So having somebody come in from outside that can see things a little clearer sometimes can really help with your scouting program. And while you're scouting, you're going to have to learn to identify insects. No, you don't need to go back to college. You don't have to, spend a ton of time doing that. But one of the first things is learn to identify the beneficials you're releasing. Way, way, way back in the day, when I first got started working with beneficials, the beneficials that were commercially available, we weren't taught about any of them in college. They were all new to me. So I would always take the packages of beneficials and I would just sit and look at them, look at what they looked like, learn their key identification features, so that once they were released out there, you would learn to recognize what they looked like, so that you could be like, oh, there's that Ophidius colmani we released, or oh, there's that Phytostilus persimilis, so that you can recognize them once they're out there, which would be very different from your native beneficials, because that's something you're going to have to be prepared for, which I can, any growers that are using biocontrol will tell you this. Once you start on a biocontrol program, lots of your native beneficials or naturally occurring beneficials are going to show up. It's what happens. And I always tell people that's free labor for you. Those guys, you didn't have to buy them. They shown up. It's free workers for you. And you do not want to kill those free workers. So you've got to identify them. You've got to learn to identify who's the good guy, who's the bad guy out there, when you're in the greenhouse. And sometimes we have insects show up that are indifferent. These guys may have just blown in on the wind, maybe like the ecology in there, but they're not causing any damage, but they may not also be really helping you. And you don't want to come in and spray for those guys, because that can, mess up your system in there. So really, it's important. Again, I cannot stress this enough. And any of you that have attended my other sessions, I am huge on getting things identified. If you call me and say, oh, I've got a thrips problem, I'm going to be like, what kind of thrips do you have? And insect identification on the pests sometimes can be difficult. There is no doubt about that. Thrips, sometimes I want to hit my head against a wall. But if you don't know, ask for help. I ask for help. I work close with a lot of the extension people and the specialists so that I can get better at identification or make sure my customers were getting things identified right. So if you don't know, you've got to get help. And if you're going to do that, you have to have either really good images or you have to have samples of the beneficials and one of the beneficials or the pests. And one of the easiest way to do that is to use an aspirator. Here this grower is holding an aspirator, and what we've done is we've banged out some banker plants, and there were some insects in there we were not sure what they were. So this little aspirator is basically a little bug vacuum that you use. You put one in your mouth, and then there's a container that when you suck on the straw, you can see here, you put this in your mouth, he's holding the container, and then you put this part here, and you suck, it captures the insects into this vial. And this way you don't have to try to, excuse me, pick them up with your hands, because that can crush them or damage them or hurt their wings, because wings and antenna and things like that are very important for identification. And you can see here, they're in the vial. Once they're in that vial, you can take this top off and put a snap cap on it. Now, you can buy these vials by the gross, and they're just a few dollars. The aspirators now run for about $7 for the entry-level ones. The aspirators are available from BioQuip. They're an entomology supply house out of California. They've got great stuff. You can get insect rearing cages, which I keep a lot of them in my house for when you want to capture insects that are emerging, or if you want to isolate plants. They've got a lot of great supplies, but I would highly recommend for growers to get these vials so that you can then snap a lid on and then get them identified. You can also get small glass vials to transfer them into and then put them in alcohol for especially things like aphids and mites and stuff that you might have to mail off to get identification on. But that's super helpful to have actual specimens. And typically someone that is going to ID them, you do need multiples of the particular insects or mites, because they may need males for identification or they may need females for identification. So it's really best if you have several specimens in there to collect. And then you can send them off, and then for the next time what that pest or beneficial was. Once you learn to identify it once, you know it for the next time, and it will save you a lot of time and effort down the road. When you're out scouting too, I cannot stress this enough, you must carry a hand lens. Here, this grower from Heart of Florida, he's just got his little flat pocket magnifying lens, nothing fancy there. But it is really, really critical to be able to see what's going on when you're out scouting, because if you are releasing beneficials, you need to see if they are egg laying, if they do have parasite exit holes. And without magnification, it is really tough to see what's going on. Even, in my younger days when I didn't need glasses, you did have to work to see these things. There's some great 10x LED lenses on the market today that they have little lights in them that help light up your field when you're out there. You can get them for about $15. So that's super helpful to be able to carry. All growers should be carrying a hand lens. You should be. Even if you're not using biocontrol agents, it will help you with your identification. Now back to the economics. If you were just to compare the cost of, let's say, a 100-gallon spray tank of Avid compared to the cost of the release of predatory mites, yes, in that situation, the predatory mites may turn out to be, or most likely are going to be, more expensive. You cannot think that way about biocontrol. You can't, because there's so many other things that play into it. When you're looking at the cost of beneficials, first of all, you got to look at the cost of the beneficials, the cost of shipping, and I should, have shipping being highlighted in big bold letters, because shipping can be an issue, and labor. Now, I'll tell you, on the cost of beneficials, make sure you're buying from a good, reputable supplier. that does have good pricing, which I'm going to go into that here in a few minutes, but I've seen quite large variances in pricing on beneficials. I've recently come into a good example on Persimilis. I've seen people paying as low as $9 for 2,000 for super high volume users, where other growers have been paying like $29 for 1,000 Persimilis. That's a huge difference there in pricing, going from $9 for 2,000 to $29 for 1,000, and that was depending on which supplier they were buying it from. So you can get wide variances in pricing out there. So do a little looking around on the pricing out there, because it's just like anything else. There is different pricing available from different suppliers. On the cost of shipping, again, this is the #1 complaint about beneficials. It's the cost of shipping. You just have to accept you're going to get a large box that's being overnighted. That's just the way it is. Now, you can do things like there's different packaging sizes on beneficials where you can get less carrier and get more beneficials in a certain size bottle. It can make them a little more difficult to distribute, but it can save on shipping costs. Also, you can talk to your suppliers about what fits in what boxes and how to pack the boxes most efficiently, and also labor. Labor, I think we're getting a lot better at with the development of all these blower systems and release systems for the beneficials. So you don't have as much someone standing there and having to sprinkle beneficials on every single plant. And then there's this question of how do you put a price on you have no reentry interval. If you are putting out beneficials and one of your biggest customers calls and you need to pull those plants, you can do it. Or if a customer shows up and they want to see what a crop looks like, do you want to say to them, I'm sorry, no, you can't go in there because, we've just sprayed pesticides. Or if you just put out beneficials, they can walk right in. And so how do you put an economic value on that? How do you put an economic value on spray drift? There are, for outdoor production, there have been some quite large lawsuits in the agricultural industry over spray drift, over someone's pesticide residue drifting onto their neighboring crops. Also, no residue on the plants. If these are plants that people want to take home and use for butterfly gardening, pollinator gardening, if they're going to be used in any kind of zoo areas, botanical gardens, where they don't want pesticide residue on there, nor do they want visible pesticide residue on there on the leaves. And how do you put a cost on that? Also, you do have the cost of spray equipment. When you are applying these, you've got to get someone with a spray license to apply pesticides. You have the cost of respirators, filters in your respirators. All those kind of things can get quite expensive. Also, something that's really, really important these days is biocontrol. Really can help prevent and reduce the eventuality of developing pesticide resistance. I it in my career working with biocontrols, I've had some bumpy roads because sometimes some of the chemical companies aren't always in favor of the work I do. But I think one of the proudest moments for me is I did have one of the guys come up to me from one of the very large chemical companies and thank me for the work I'm doing, because he said it is allowing to give their pesticide product longer longevity. It's going to make their product be able to be used a lot longer because of using the biocontrols. And then saving their chemistries for when they were needed. It was going to allow this product to have a longer lifespan and not develop resistance so fast, which we've seen with some chemistries because people just use that one product over and over and over again. So it's something, the biocontrols can really be a tool to help us keep some of our pesticides. Also, and we're not going to talk about pollinators today, but I know many of you know about the issue. It is something that if you are using biocontrol agents, it can alleviate some of the pressure on some of the pollinator concerns today. So we've talked about all these questions. Now, what if you need help with finding the answers to these, or if you're still confused on some of these things? I think it is really important to form a relationship that's with someone that knows what they are doing. This picture right here sums it all up. Lloyd Traven at Peachtree Farms working with Ron Valentine, now with Syngenta Bioline. Lloyd and Ron have worked together for years. They formed a partnership, and that's basically what happens when you work with somebody on a biocontrol program. You form this partnership because there are so many questions that do come up in the process. You have to have somebody that is going to be able to work with you and hold your hand, especially when getting started, because you are going to hit some bumps, and it's getting over these bumps and having someone to help you really can make a difference. Where do you find these relationships? Well, they're the biocontrol supply companies, first and foremost, which can be the actual insectaries themselves or the distributors. Extension. Some states have done a really good job with putting together really good extension programs and are providing some really good information. If you're not so lucky to be in a state that has this available, that's the beauty of the internet. You can have access to their webinars. You can have access to their videos. You can have uh, uh, you can have all this technological media available to you online out there. And yeah, oh, thanks, Dan, for answering that. Somebody was asking about where you get the supplies for the aspirators and stuff, and that was BioQuip. And it's available. Just Google them up. It's if anybody wants to buy me a Christmas present, you can buy it for me from BioQuip. I'll just tell you that right now. But anyhow, back to relationships. Other growers, and this is something I would love to see us do, is to get a better working group together of growers that where we can discuss what's working in what we're seeing in the biocontrol worlds, the issues we're having, and form those relationships. But having a grower to help you, I think, is really important because they've been there. They've walked in your shoes. They are dealing with biocontrols as well as, you know, oh, the sprinkler head's leaking over here, as well as, oh, we've got to pull these plants. So you know, the growers have to be so multitasking on the job so other growers can really understand the situation that you're in. And of course, there's always consultants. There aren't a lot of us out there, and there's even fewer of us that specialize in biocontrol. So with that, there's lots of places that you can build these relationships, but I will tell you, you are going to build relationships. Because again, some of these guys I'm working with, I've got one customer I've been working with almost 18 years now, and they're still a customer of mine, and we're still learning and we're still refining their biocontrol program. Okay, now these qualifications, and it is important that you think about this when you do choose these people to work with. I think it's really important to ask about their background. What qualifies them to be able to help you? Because just like with any other trend, if there's money to be made, people are going to jump on board. And I've seen more people willing to sell biocontrol agents these days and offer up advice. And sadly, they're not necessarily qualified to give you information. Now, sometimes they're really good because they'll be like, you know what, I don't know the answer to that. Let me try to find out. Let me get someone that can answer it for you and help you in that situation. But unfortunately, what I'm seeing sometimes are bad recommendations. And this can lead to your program completely collapsing before you even get started. So that's why when you talk to other growers, talk to them about who they're working with, who they've been successful with, who are the knowledgeable people out there, because that will help you already do a little bit of that detective work on what qualifies these people to be able to help you. Sadly, there's no certification that we can carry as, you know, certified biocontrol consultant people to know what we're talking about at this point. So you're going to have to talk to other people in the industry and get feedback there. Also, I think it's really important when you're working with anybody is their resources they have available to them, because again, you as a grower want to be kept in the loop on as information changes, as pesticide information changes, as packaging information changes, and as things change. So it's really important to know, your suppliers network of who they're connected with, because all of us, as I call us, bug nerds, you know, we're all interwebbed together. We talk, we share, because at the end of the day, our whole goal is to help growers be successful with their biocontrol programs. So just make sure when you're working with somebody, and even just because they say it assertively or just because they've been around a long time in the industry does not necessarily mean they know what they're talking about with biocontrol agents. Because again, it's a moving target, some of it, and there's new information, and information is changing out there. Now, as far as where to get bugs, there's lots of insectaries distributors out there, and I'm going to run through this list because I think we've got about 10 minutes less. Applied Bionomics, they're based out of BC, Canada, and they've targeted a little bit more on the Pacific Northwest market out there. There's BASF, which purchased Becker Underwood. They are the largest producer of nematodes in the world. They're actually doubling their production capacity because the demand for nematodes is just skyrocketing in the U.S. Well, the U.S. and the world. Beneficial insectary. Beneficial insectary has been a little bit of a quieter insectary based out in California. But they are growing and they're expanding, and I have a little bit more information about them coming up. There's somebody that you guys should keep your eye on, because what's nice about them being that they are inside the U.S., not all, but some of their products you can get next day delivery on. So you can call first thing in the morning and possibly get it by tomorrow, if not next day. There's BioBest Biological System. I'm sure many of you are familiar with BioBest. They're one of the largest producers in the world. They've got excellent technical staff out there to support you. They've had some really great innovations lately, like with the food sources for the mites to help reduce the number of your predatory mites going out and helping with the mite health out there. There's an excellent article that just came out today on that. I actually just posted it on my Facebook page this morning. There's also Biotactics. They're a smaller insectary that has mite production in California. There's also BioWorks. BioWorks is a little different in the fact that they are focused more on biological microbial products, but they do have beneficial nematodes available. IPM Labs, she's a distributor based out of New York. She's been doing this for, I believe, about 25 years, so she has a lot of time in the industry. Copert Biological Systems, they're another one of the largest producers in the world. They have staff readily available all over, and they too are working on new release systems and new predatory mites and new beneficial insects. So they're one to keep watch too about their new advances they have out there. Then there's Syngenta Bioline. I've always referred to Syngenta Bioline as the redheaded stepchild of Syngenta, because they've had this insectary in California forever, basically, and most people always think of Syngenta as a chemical company, but they do have an insectary in California as well as European production. Just to give them a little plug, not just because they're the sponsor of this event today, but when it comes to Persimolis, which is the predatory mite that controls 2 spots, I think they are the best producer in the world. The results we get with their product is untouchable. And they do an excellent job with that. Now, they do have a complete line of everything else that they produce, but they too are working on a lot of cutting edge items, different release systems. There's also the Bug Factory, which has been recently purchased as part of BioBest, and the Bug Factory is located up in British Columbia. BioBest has been acquiring lately a lot of the smaller insectaries out there. Now, when you're working with the suppliers, and especially if they're distributors, they need to understand your system. They need to understand your climate. When growers are in the South or the Pacific Northwest, your recommendations can be very different than what they are in the Northeast. Your pest complexes can be very different. One of the things I run into, if you're in the warmer, lower tiers of the United States, we don't have diapausing 2 spots. So if you see a red mite in the South, that is not a diapausing 2 spot, and you're not going to be using what you would use probably to control a 2 spot up north. So it's really important that people understand the intricacies of where you're trying to do this biocontrol program, what your climate is, how you're growing. If you're on an ebb and flood bench compared to a wire bench on recommendations on aphid programs, it can make a difference. So it's really important for people to be able to understand these, and that's why it's sometimes hard to make biocontrol recommendations over the phone, because we need to see how you're growing, what the conditions are. So, you know, that kind of stuff is critical. Photos help, but having one of us on site really can make a difference. One of the other things when you're working with a distributor down here, if you're working with a distributor, whose brand of product are you going to get? Some companies are distributors for multiple suppliers. And let's say you do order Persimilis, but you really want that Syngenta Persimilis. Are you going to get Syngenta Persimilis, or are you going to get somebody's else? So make sure when you work with distributors, whose product are you going to show up, especially if you want a particular brand name or packaging. Also, working with distributors, and I am adamant about this, your biocontrol agent should be dropped, shipped to you direct. You know, these distributors are great at, you know, supporting you, taking the orders, helping with some technical information, but the actual beneficial insects need to come to you from the insectary and do not need to stop off at one or two places to get repackages by other distributors. You want the freshest product possible. You want your product to be drop shipped to you direct from the actual insectary out there. Now, with these different sellers of biocontrol agents, they do have different application methods available. Here with Syngenta, this is Persimilis, again, for two-spot control. Both these packaging have 2,000 mites in them. Which packaging is going to be right for you? Depends on what you're doing. Traditionally, the larger bottle on the right is used to cover larger areas because you have more carriers, so you can distribute it more evenly. On the left-hand side, we use this product more often, this packaging, for spot treatments, or if you have to put out like 500 packages of them, the shipping between using the small vials compared to the large vials can be hundreds of dollars of difference. So again, you have to look at what you're doing, how many you're releasing, decide which type of packaging is going to be right for you. So that's something you need to talk about before you place these orders. Traditionally, products have been sprinkled out in the past, but now we're seeing more sachets, more kinds of sachets. There's large sachets, there's mini sachets, there's these doubled over Gemini sachets, there are these bug line long ropes of sachets. So again, you really have to look at all these different application methods to see which is going to be right for your system. And if there is a problem out there, and here's a good example of something that has gotten out of control, how are you going to fix that problem? You need to have these people be able to help you. It could be as simple as you're not releasing the biocontrol agent correctly. You may need to go back and visit how they're being applied, if you're getting them out fast enough, but you're going to need that relationship to help people help fix things for you. When you do get your beneficials, before you get your first shipment, make sure you know what you're going to do. Make sure you get the directions before they arrive, because sometimes if you just open a box and you have all these bottles in here and there's no instruction sheets, you may not know what to do. Ask for directions before they come. Ask about if there's storage issues, if you can't apply something because it's raining or somebody can't come into work that day. So you need to look at all these issues. So I'm going to skip here towards the end. Being willing to follow up is a critical part on it too. And just got to learn your other beneficials because there's so many out there. So ask a lot of questions, try to think outside the box. And again, remember, we're all learning as we're going. So if anybody has any questions, I saw a few pop by. Sorry, it was hard to answer as we're going. I'm sure I can do those now. Also, on the lower right is my Facebook page. I know a lot of people aren't on Facebook, but if you are, this page, I post upcoming education, I post new research, people can post questions and stuff, and you know, hopefully we can get a bit more dialogue going on the beneficials over there. So that said, Brian, now I need to find those questions.
All right, I'll help you with that a little bit here too. One question is, are you working with retail nurseries who want to keep their clean purchase plants clean, and trying to educate their customers? So what's your experience working with
Yes.
the retail nurseries?
Yes, well, I've worked with garden centers that, once their plants have arrived, you're open to the public. Yes, I've worked with them putting together programs where we do use beneficials in those areas, also in their production areas. I do think educating your consumers is something we are really, really missing in our industry. I've actually been willing to do a lot of homeowner talks lately, and I always start my talks with them showing them what you guys are doing, showing how, we're releasing hundreds and thousands of these beneficials, how you're reducing your pesticides, and these homeowners are always like, well, where can we buy these plants? We want to support these companies. And I think that we're missing the boat in not marketing it. Now, some garden centers have done a good job by putting up signage explaining about their beneficials and what they're doing. We just need to do more of it. But absolutely, when I'm working with commercial growers slash if they retail, I'll come in and educate and work with the growers on the grower side of it, and then also educate their customers, and then also train their garden center people on how to answer their customers' questions and how to explain what they're doing, so it doesn't seem too out there, because you have to very simplify it down to a homeowner level when you are talking about the beneficials.
Okay, and you already answered this, but it's worth just saying again. What company are you buying the aspirators and the vials from?
The vials and aspirators come from BioQuip. Again, it's a company based out of California. Their website's not always super duper friendly, but the aspirators are in there. If you can't find them, you can uh, spray out, you can contact me, and I can get you a link to that. And my only shameless self plug, which I don't like to do that, is the 10x hand lenses with the LED lights. I do have them for sale on my website, but I hate doing that. But it's a good place for growers if they need them. That's where they can get them.
All right. Well, I think we're out of time right now. So, folks, we've got about 1 or 2 minutes before we go to our next speaker, which is going to be Nancy Rexsiegel from Syngenta. So give us just a couple of minutes, and we will be back with that. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thanks.